I'm going to start with the Hungary section, and we can please now invite John O'Sullivan, who has come from Budapest. He recently had a meeting on SMRs with David Wright, who is the Nuclear Regulation Commissioner. And so I thought it'd be very appropriate to have him speak and give some remarks on building on basically what they discussed in that meeting on March the 17th. So, John, thank you so much for joining us. I'm extremely grateful for you making the journey all the way from Budapest. And then I would like to introduce Colonel Scott McLearn. It's very kind of you to come. Thank you very much. I know you're on a very busy schedule with the 3SI. So thank you very much for joining us. And he is the US Defense Attaché for Croatia. So, and then online, we have Zombor from Budapest. If we can try and get him online, he should be joining us from Hungary. Let's see if that works. Sometimes we have to improvise a little bit. And then Marek Matrasek, who is the chairman of CEC Group in Poland. So Marek's very kindly going to moderate, and we're going to have until 10:45 some remarks about basically the election, since the election with Viktor Orban, and a discussion really about the geostrategic aspects of the region and a bit of the idea of defense and how that can play into SMRs as dual use in a way which is appropriate for the civilian nuclear sector. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure to be here, and I look forward to the discussion later. But I want to begin by thanking Ms. Laetitia Cash for her kind remarks. And I must say, but before I embark on my argument, I should say one thing. I won't be employing any visual aids, having been their victim on too many occasions. But I am nervous that I may be something of an imposter. The reason I'm here is that I suspect can be traced to the conference that my institute held in March on small modular reactors. It was held in cooperation with the United States Embassy, and I'm particularly grateful for the presence at it of David Wright, the Commissioner of the US Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and for his intellectual leadership on that occasion, which was most impressive. The event formed part of a series we launched under the title Green Promises, Grey Realities, where we aim to examine the practical constraints and trade-offs behind Europe's energy transition. That conference and others were the brainchild of our research department, and in particular, our energy researcher, Matthias Weider, who comes from a strong background of energy policy at the ministry in Budapest. He is not able to be present here today. He and I both regret that, and in a way I'm representing him. But also, I hope, adding some wider experience of politics and international relations. While earlier discussions in our series focused principally on oil and gas and natural gas, the immediate realities of energy security, the second event I was describing turned to nuclear energy, and in particular to SMRs as a forward-looking response to the challenges ahead. The motivation behind this is both regional and specifically Hungarian. Hungary finds itself in a paradoxical position. On the one hand, it's not among the forerunners in SMR development within Central Europe. On the other hand, it possesses significant nuclear experience, an industrial base, and a strategic location that could allow it to become a meaningful participant in this emerging field, provided that the political intent is matched by timely action. There is also a structural dilemma in play. Europe operates as a highly interconnected electricity system, where in principle, large-scale nuclear power plants remain a logical solution. However, in practice, their long construction times, rising costs, and increasing project risks make them difficult to deal with within the timeframes now required. Hungary's own experience with the PAX-2 project illustrates this challenge. More than a decade after the agreement was signed, progress remains limited, and timelines continue to shift. That's not an isolated case, but part of a broader European pattern. It is precisely in this context that SMRs become strategically relevant. They don't replace large-scale nuclear power, but they offer an alternative pathway, one that is potentially faster, more flexible, and more aligned with current economic and technical realities. At the same time, timing is crucial. The global SMR landscape is still taking shape, with multiple competing designs and strategic partnerships emerging. And of course, as we know, Dubrovnik in the next few days is hosting most of the competitors in this coming struggle for power. Not all of these will succeed, and those who enter too late risk being excluded from both technological and industrial opportunities. Hungary has already taken initial steps, including recent legislative changes that formally recognize SMR technologies, as well as exploring international cooperation, particularly with the United States, but also with other partners. However, at this stage, engagement remains essentially exploratory, and no final technical or industrial pathway has yet been selected. For us, the March conference was therefore not simply about nuclear energy. It was about ensuring that Hungary and the wider region is present in these early stage discussions where future partnerships, supply chains, and strategic directions are being defined. Because in this field, timing and positioning may ultimately matter almost as much as the technology itself. So let me look at some of the challenging strategic and political realities to which policy in Hungary and elsewhere must adjust. We meet at a moment when politics, very often clouded by rhetoric, misinterpretation, media bias, has for once clarified itself in the simple act of voting. On election night in Budapest, I had a certain confidence, unfashionable, even suspect in some circles, that three basic propositions would prove true, and they did. First, the election was actually held. It wasn't postponed or cancelled or derailed by those, as some who had written its obituary in advance argued it would be. Second, the result was accepted peacefully. No riots, no constitutional theatrics, no descent into chaos, confidently predicted by some commentators who, one suspects, have grown too fond of crisis as a narrative device. And third, Prime Minister Viktor Orban conceded defeat early, clearly, and with dignity. Okay. I like a here now and then, yes. Now, many people had denied that these three things could happen. Why were they wrong? I think because Hungarians, whatever their political differences, actually retain a deep and hard-earned attachment to democracy, an attachment forged not in seminar rooms, but in the long struggle from 1956 to 1989. That inheritance will not be lightly discarded, not by voters, not by leaders, and even not by those who lose. So the decisive test of democratic legitimacy, the only test that ultimately matters, was passed with ease. That is, can the voters throw the rascals out? They could, and they did. What then emerges from this moment? First, a political transformation. Hungary has not exactly moved left. It has reconfigured its center-right. Peter Magyar has constructed something unusual, a coalition drawing support from both conservative voters and dislocated elements of the former left whose parties simply didn't figure in this election. I mean, the two left parties, which used to form the government, got less than 5% of the vote between them. Their voters, therefore, had switched. Second, Second, political question, can this coalition endure? Because stability is what, of course, we very much need in Hungary and elsewhere. Movements assemble quickly, often contain within them seeds of division. Voters shape parties as much as parties shape voters, and the long-term direction of this new formation still remains uncertain. For the moment, however, and for the foreseeable future, the Hungarians now have a pretty stable two-party system. And third, political continuity. Viktor Orban, though defeated, is not removed from the stage. At 62, he remains a central figure, not only in Hungarian politics, but in the wider European debate over sovereignty, identity, and the future of what is now often called national conservatism. I should say that when I saw that he had announced that he would not be remaining in Parliament, I remembered the remark of Talleyrand about the death of an ambassador, which is, I wonder why he did that. And I think that Viktor Orban will still be a significant factor in European politics on these issues, as I say, for the foreseeable future. But we will see how he does that. But just to sum up this point, what we are witnessing is not an ending, but the beginning of a contest between two visions of the center-right in Europe, which has the prospect of very strong political stability. And that is, in a sense, certainty and stability is what business always needs on these occasions. So when it comes to changes in Hungary's energy policy, because the two parties are center-right, there will be elements of continuity as much as of change. There are adjustments likely to occur compared to the Orban government's approach, but overall, the structure is expected to remain largely intact with shifts of emphasis here, which can be anticipated. One such area is the external positioning of energy policy. There is likely to be close alignment with European Union regulatory frameworks and processes, which may influence the use of EU funding, the development of infrastructure, and the interaction between national and EU level decision making. At the same time, diversification is expected to receive greater emphasis. While it has already been present in Hungarian energy policy, it may become more explicitly prioritized, including efforts to reduce reliance on single source supply structures, to expand cooperation with a broader range of partners, and to increase flexibility within supply chains. But the pace of these changes will be constrained by existing infrastructure and existing contractual arrangements. Some adjustments may also appear in pricing policy. The system of regulated household energy prices is not expected to be removed in the short term, but it will be modified or recalibrated to better reflect market conditions, budgetary considerations, and the condition of the people. Nuclear energy will remain, however, a constant element in the system. My colleagues and I see no indication of a structural shift away from nuclear, though differences will emerge in how future projects are approached, particularly in relation to partnerships and technological options. This includes the possibility of increased attention to alternative nuclear technologies, such as small modular reactors, primarily in connection with project timelines, financing structures, and system flexibility. At the same time, several core factors are likely to remain unchanged. Energy security continues to be a central objective. Affordability remains a key constraint, and overall, the system continues to be shaped by strong state involvement. Taken together, the expected developments point to adjustments in emphasis, coordination, external orientation, rather than a fundamental restructuring of Hungary's energy policy. Of course, in the famous words of the conservative sage M. Stanton Evans, personnel is policy. since the government has only this week been announced, we should be cautious about drawing too many conclusions at this stage. Certainly, however, the Minister for Energy, István Kapitány, formerly of Shell, brings the right kind of experience to his job. He's got a technocrat's grasp of what needs to be done, and in general, the appointments to the energy and economic portfolios are clearly intended to calm the markets, reassure the markets. Of course, the markets are very hard to reassure these days. But the most significant appointment, I think, in relation to energy policy so far is that of Anita Orban, who is both foreign minister and deputy prime minister. Her experience includes a doctorate at the Fletcher School, an internship at the Heritage Foundation, the publication of her PhD on Russian energy policy in Central Europe, turned into a book so expensive that only lobbyists can afford to buy it. Her experience as the Orban government's energy ambassador in Orban's second government, from which she resigned over policy, and then since then she has followed a very successful career in European corporate life. No Hungarian government will be able to cut energy ties with Russia entirely, but she seems clearly likely to take Hungary's energy policy in a pro-EU and Russia-skeptic direction, and also in a transatlantic direction too. Now, it may seem odd to say so at present, but the conditions for such a move to Atlanticism in energy will be quite propitious. The conditions for it will be quite propitious. The current exchange of insults across the Atlantic between political leaders, the heated discussions of Europe developing a strategic autonomy and perhaps splitting NATO in two, and the rise of MAGA isolationism in America, these are serious problems. They will preoccupy us for some time, but they are unlikely, in my view, to bring about anything approaching the end of the Atlantic Alliance. The reasons are quite simple. Without US leadership, NATO will not function well. And that leadership, and that leadership will be, must be enough in men and material to sustain US preeminence in NATO, which is a key strategic necessity. EU strategic autonomy lacks the essential underpinning of a European polis and people that would support the financial and military commitments needed for such an ambitious role. But if America is to do and spend less, then Europe must do and spend more. But it must do that extra spending, additional spending, on NATO. Strategic autonomy means either diverting funds from NATO or duplicating NATO functions that already exist. What military activities it has already spawned, like the Rapid Reaction Force, have been largely embarrassing failures, with governments asking their allies to keep their soldiers in post because they didn't want to basically send the replacements they had promised. At a time when more defense spending is acutely necessary, it can't really be wasted on political symbols that have relatively little military value. EU strategic autonomy would be defending not the European continent, but the European idea. We've already sacrificed Mediterranean Europe to the euro. We can't afford to waste treasure and, in time, perhaps lives, in order to affirm symbols. Europeans have been responding to that kind of criticism with righteous indignation and loud talk of accepting the end of the Atlantic Alliance, saying goodbye to NATO, forging, as I say, a new independent European military alliance. Somehow or other, Elon Musk and his Channel X have got mixed up in this argument. The hypocrisy I will pass that one on. Hypocrisy of denouncing Musk on his own channel always strikes me as funny. Two realities are forgotten in all of these back and forth debates. The first is that Europe and America would both suffer badly from the end of NATO. America would lose several major military allies in a multipolar world of great powers in which the US is no longer the undisputed hegemon. Europe outside NATO would have to invest massively in nuclear and conventional defense to match Russia's growing, not growing, but still serious post-Ukraine military threat, and to compensate for the loss of the American nuclear umbrella from money that Europe's weak economies simply don't have. Moreover, the behavior of the French, the British, and now the German governments suggests that they don't have the nerve to cut welfare spending quite enough to raise serious funding for defense. So Europe and America will either hang together or hang separately, and that's important. In recent years, we have begun, sometimes reluctantly, to rediscover a truth that earlier generations took for granted, that the economy is not an independent system floating above reality, but a structure rooted in physical foundations. And among those foundations, energy is paramount. For a long time, energy remained politically invisible. It functioned quietly in the background, assumed rather than examined. Only when it faltered, when prices rose, supplies tightened, systems failed, did it return to the center of political life. Well, we are now living in such a moment. Across Europe and across the wider Western world, there is visible a remarkable shift, a reversal even, in how energy policy is understood. The language of transition, once dominated by aspiration, has been confronted by the constraints of reality. And nowhere is that more evident than in the renewed debate over nuclear power. For years, nuclear energy was treated as a relic, technically impressive, but politically inconvenient. It was sidelined in favor of solutions that, while attractive in theory, often proved insufficient in practice. But reality has a way of reasserting itself. Energy security, economic stability, and industrial competitiveness cannot be sustained on intermittent foundations alone. The modern state, its hospitals, its industries, its digital infrastructures requires reliability. It requires scale. It requires continuity. And nuclear energy, whatever its controversies, provides those things. What we are witnessing today, therefore, is not a policy adjustment, but a deeper intellectual correction, a recognition that energy policy must be grounded not in wishful thinking, but in the hard arithmetic of supply, demand, and resilience. In this sense, nuclear expertise, once regarded as narrow, even marginal, is returning to the center of strategic thinking. It is no longer a specialist concern, but a matter of a pillar of national capacity. If I can draw these threads together, the lesson of recent events, political and economic, is the same. Reality has returned. In Hungary, it has returned through the ballot box, overturning confident predictions and reminding us that democracy can function with clarity of restraint, and it settles things. In energy policy, it has returned through necessity, forcing governments to confront the limits of ideology and the demands of the physical world. And in both cases, the message is unmistakable. Systems endure because they work. Democracies endure because they mean that the people can change governments. Economies endure because they are powered reliably, sustainably, and in accordance with reality. That is the conversation we are here to begin. Many thanks.
It's working. Never do at conferences. Before I progress, I think I owe John an apology because I should have introduced him. And I am minded now to actually make everyone in the room aware of how great a privilege it is for us to have John here with us. For those of you who are unaware, John is one of the most illustrious people in British and European and American politics. He started off his career as a journalist. He was an associate editor on the Times and the Telegraph. He founded a number of and edited a number of illustrious political journals, amongst the National Review, many of whom you'll be familiar with that. Above all, he had a wonderful career as a key policy advisor to Mrs. Thatcher when she was Prime Minister in the United Kingdom, covering all the areas of policy. He then, after Mrs. Thatcher retired, he moved to the United States and joined a number of think tanks, of a number of which I'm sure you are familiar with, the Hudson Institute, the Nixon Institute, and above all, the Heritage Foundation, where he, in the mid-1990s, he set up the New Atlantic Initiative, which in a way was the progenitor of the idea of the three Cs, because the idea of the New Atlantic Initiative was to bring in the countries of the then Central Europe into NATO and into the Western security orbit. And he was the mentor of many leading politicians in Europe today. Radek Sikorski, the current foreign minister of Poland, was a student, as it were, of John intellectually, but also worked under John at the New Atlantic Initiative in Washington in the late 1990s. And as you're all aware, he's most recently has been the chairman of the Danube Institute, which is a very a major and very important think tank in Hungary. I owed John an apology for not introducing him at the beginning of it, so it's slightly reverse order. But I also owed it, I thought, to the audience to make sure that everyone in the room was aware of what a great privilege it has been to be able to host John here today. And Laetitia, thank you so much for initiating his invitation. So on the program, I'm not sure if we have Zombor on the line or whether we can move to Colonel Scott McLearn. In contrast to John, despite my best internet sleuthing, I was unable to discover a single iota of biography of the good Colonel. So unless you want to introduce yourself, so I can only introduce him as the US Defense Attaché in Croatia, and I understand, Colonel, you have some prepared remarks as well. So it will be a great honor for us also to listen to you. So please do take the floor, or you may want to speak from the podium or from the
whichever. This is fine. Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, and thank you for the remarks, John. I'm a big fan. So, and good morning, Marek. Thank you all for having me. It's a pleasure to be back in beautiful Dubrovnik, and it's also a real honor for me to be a member of this distinguished panel. I never thought years ago I would have an opportunity to sit in the front instead of in the back of the venues. I think that this topic is important. In addition to me looking at it from a military standpoint, I think that energy security is important for all of our governments. And I think now is actually a time, because of the Hague Commitment, where we have an umbrella that potentially incentivizes and protects those energy projects. So I'd like to delve into that. So a little bit about myself. Currently, I'm the defense attaché to Croatia from the United States. My previous assignment before this was the NATO section chief in the Joint Staff, advising the chairman of the Joint Chiefs on NATO policy. In total, I spent 6 years at NATO and a good portion of my career, at least 15 years, working alongside fellow NATO allies. So, full disclosure, I'm not a nuclear power expert, but I believe I'm a NATO policy expert, at least from the Washington, D.C. perspective. Over the last 26 years in uniform, I've witnessed shifts and changes in the alliance. And this latest transformation, being called NATO 3.0 in Brussels, is one of heightened vigilance, improved readiness, and increased defense spending, increased spending writ large, which is probably the most noticeable change in all of our capitals. In June of 2025, in The Hague, NATO allies pledged to invest 5% of their gross domestic product on defense, including 3.5 on hard defense spending and 1.5 on dual-use products or projects, also called defense and security related expenditures. Across the alliance, NATO allies have already taken important steps to increase defense spending and generate strategic readiness required to secure the Euro-Atlantic area and provide conventional deterrence and defense. This is true in Budapest as it is in other capitals. The other side of the pledge is the commitment to spend 1.5% of GDP on dual-use projects or security and defense-related projects. And that I'd like to dive into that a little bit deeper today because I think it's relevant for what we're discussing here on energy security. So while it's new that the Alliance is tracking these defense and security-related expenditures, it's not new that we're spending on these things. I mean, these are type of investments that every ally has been making since the founding of NATO and probably much longer. They just maybe weren't calling it what they call it today. So let me give you the definition by NATO standards. So NATO defines defense and security related expenditures as those made by an ally at all levels of government in support of their defense and security related obligations, especially those under the North Atlantic Treaty and NATO's 3 core tasks, which are not already captured under the NATO defense expenditure definition, kind of the hard defense spending. Such a broad definition was intentional, and it means that allies like Hungary are only limited by their creativity in linking projects to defense, and more importantly, by the collaboration within their government. And I'll dive into that a little bit later, because I think that's also important. Every ally should meet or exceed this metric, especially allies within the European Union, where members jointly invest in projects that improve interconnectivity and infrastructure, and have been doing so for decades. So I think in this regard, the European Union may have an advantage on us on the other side of the Atlantic. So let me give you a few examples to show how allied capitals can look to invest in this commitment. So expenditures for mixed civil, military, and civil activities that enable the execution of NATO or national defense plans. So here's a couple examples of those. Cybersecurity agencies, sector-specific cyber emergency response teams or computer emergency response teams, border security activities tied to NATO defense plans, such as advanced surveillance systems to monitor irregular migration or activities on borders, counterterrorism initiatives, including specialized training for civilian law enforcement agencies. The second category is expenditures supporting national resilience planning or NATO defense plans, such as investments in critical infrastructure to meet the alliance's resilience objectives, such as energy grids, very important to the current topic, designed to withstand cyber attacks with improved hardening. Civilian planning integrated with NATO's deterrence and defense of the Euro-Atlantic family of plans, including emergency response coordination systems. Stockpiling of essential resources, such as medical supplies and food reserves, to support national resilience during crises. A third area is defense industrial capacity, expenditures to enhance the defense industrial sector, such as expanding or repurposing production facilities for military or dual-use purposes, such as factories capable of manufacturing both civilian and military drones, something that Croatia is looking at right now. Investments in advanced manufacturing technologies to improve defense production efficiency, such as 3D printing for rapid prototyping or military experimental. Government funding for research and development of defense-related technologies. This is pretty broad as well. A fourth category is expenditures fostering defense innovation ecosystems, such as public funding for public-private equity investment funds, accelerators and technology startups, which is kind of similar to the last example. Support for dual-use technology development with defense applications, and then partnerships with academia to advance research in emerging technologies. A fifth category is expenditures for stockpiling reserves critical to defense and security, such as stockpiling industrial raw materials for military production, and probably most germane to this conversation, enhancing the energy grid or energy reserve specifically allocated for military or national resilience purposes. Clearly, there's a lot of opportunities here with the SMRs and other nuclear opportunities. And I see this also in Hungary's case, where they've made several nuclear commitments recently to expand their grid. So I've got a few more examples that I can lead into during the discussion, but I think importantly, many of these examples are projects that NATO capitals have already begun or have been contemplating for years. I believe that the Hague Summit commitment gives capitals an additional incentive to complete these projects in the near term rather than in some 20-year plan. With important projects like transportation, cyber, and energy infrastructure upgrades, allies can easily meet the 1.5% commitment. So the hard part on this commitment, I think, as I was saying before, is that the communication between ministries. Most of the experts on the Hague commitment reside in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in most of our capitals, or the Ministry of Defense. Very few of them are in the Ministry of Economy, Ministry of Interior, or Ministry of Transportation. However, the list of everything that I've given you, almost all of those projects would be conducted by those ministries. So Ministry of Interior, Economy, or Foreign Affairs, or Transportation. So it's critical that those 5 ministries really have a discussion across the government to plan out and then clearly communicate those projects. And then on the back end of it, transmit that information to NATO so they get credit for it, get the most out of these projects. So again, it's an honor to be here today with this distinguished panel, and I look forward to the discussion we'll have afterward. Thank you, Marek.
Thank you very much, Colonel. I very much enjoyed your remarks, because I think what you brought to the fore is that the traditional definition of defense has much expanded over the last decade. It's no longer about tanks and aeroplanes, that's part of it. But what we're seeing, because of the nature of the evolving threat from Russia, is that ultimately things like energy, infrastructure, cyber, increasingly AI, are all part of a broader package, which is more broad than kinetic defense. It's about resilience and regional resilience. So I'm delighted that the US administration and the defense attachés throughout the region have that perspective, because I think this joined up approach to security is really what you need with these emerging threats from the East, which are directed against energy assets, infrastructure assets, obviously, so the cyber threat, and having that more broader approach to defense and collaboration, defense collaboration between the United States on the one hand and Central Europe on the other is very, very encouraging. So thank you again. So Laetitia, on the agenda, we have one final panelist to join us virtually. And I don't know if Zombor Berezvai from Budapest is on the line. We're very privileged if he is.
Yes.
I'll just give a very quick introduction to Zoltan, who unfortunately couldn't be with us in person, but he's an illustrious academic. He has a commercial background. After having graduated from the Eötvös Loránd University, he joined Procter & Gamble, but more after that, he began a very interesting academic career, and amongst which he became the chief economist of the Hungarian Competition Authority, and he has held successive academic posts of increasing seniority at the Corvinus University of Budapest. And he is particularly focused in his research on transportation, energy markets, food industry, and retail. I'm not sure we're interested in the latter too much on this panel, but certainly energy markets is something that he is one of the leading Hungarian experts. So we're very privileged to have him with us today. So good morning, Zombor. Can you hear us?
Yes, good morning. I can hear you well. I hope you
Excellent.
can
It's
also hear me
working.
well.
Zombor, do you have any prepared remarks? If not, I can perhaps ask you to reflect a little bit on what you've heard, and I have one or two questions that may prompt you in the right direction. Would you like to proceed in that way?
Well, actually, I think I can say a few words also in connection to what Joan and Scott have already said. So thank you for having me. Unfortunately, I can only join online because of some other duties here in Budapest. And thank you, Marek, for this very kind introduction. And I pretty much enjoyed the previous two presentations in this panel. So I'm an economist, and yeah, so I'm also not a technical expert in nuclear energy, but I can provide a more economic approach on what are the benefits of mainly SMRs and how can we proceed in shaping the future of Europe's and Hungary's energy market with these small nuclear reactors. So before a very short role of nuclear energy in Hungary. So currently in Hungary, we have one nuclear power plant, which is located in Paks in the southern part of Hungary, and it produces roughly 45% of the electricity that we consume in Hungary. So it is very substantial in case of electricity production in Hungary. And if we check the total energy need of Hungary, including all other energy sources, then it represents around 18%. And it is quite stable over time. So in the past 10 years, it is a very reliable energy source. And we also count on this in the upcoming years or maybe decades. Actually, these figures are above EU and Visegrad averages, so we rely more on nuclear energy than EU countries on average, and then the other Visegrad countries, so then Slovakia, the Czech Republic, and Poland. But we also see that there is actually an increasing need for electricity, not always on energy, but rather on electricity, which is actually caused by the electrification that we see almost everywhere in the industry. So there are more electric vehicles, more electric equipment. There are actually some heating devices that is replaced by electricity. So even if the total energy need is not changing over time, there is a shift from other energy sources to electricity. And this is actually causing a need for more electricity production. Additionally, in Hungary, in the past years, a lot of battery power plants were announced. So some of them are already working. Some of them will start production in the upcoming months or years, and they also need a lot of energy. So there is actually a need for a secure, reliable, and of course cheap electricity in Hungary. And so I think that SMRs or these small nuclear or small modular reactors can actually provide a very good solution for this increasing need because of mainly three reasons. One is that from an investment point of view, the large nuclear reactors that is, as John was already mentioned, one in Paks is already under construction. And it is actually, so John said that it is since a decade we are building it. Actually, the first time the Hungarian parliament announced or the Hungarian parliament approved that the country should establish a new nuclear power plant in Paks was in 2009. So actually, it was 17 years ago when the Hungarian parliament said that, yes, we want to build a new nuclear power plant. And 17 years later, we are still starting the construction of the plant. There are some groundworks already done, but physically the plant will be constructed or will start to be constructed right now. So it is extremely lengthy to do it, and of course extremely costly at the same time. And it is also very difficult to project both the timeline and the cost of these projects. And this is also having a negative influence on how can we market or how can we involve external or private money in this investment, because it is very, very risky when it will actually generate electricity and when it will provide return for a private investor. So I think the real issue with this is that the current nuclear reactors are not really bankable, and they provide they require that a lot of public money should be invested in it. And of course, it will also reduce competition in this regard, which is not a good thing, and also rely on a lot of political factors. And SMRs have the advantage that they are much smaller. They can operate or they can be constructed in a much faster way. So both in terms of the overall total money that is needed, and also the timeline is much, much less than for a large nuclear power plant. So it is more likely much more bankable. So it is easier to get private money into it. It is easier to make competition. And of course, it is easier to actually execute the project. And this is what we need at the end of the day, a nuclear power plant that can function whenever there is demand or more demand for electricity. Also, from a security point of view, and I think it is very important to raise that one large power plant is, of course, always more risky than multiple smaller power plants. Also, from network theory, it is pretty much visible that also by a foreign attack, it is much easier to separate one large nuclear power plant. And since it is currently producing 45% of Hungary's electricity, if there is an attack on this facility, then actually the whole country will black out. And with multiple smaller power plants, the network can be established in a much more reliable and much more secure way. And we see that there are a lot of tensions and a lot of conflicts arising in the world globally. So even if we believe that currently Europe and Hungary is a safe country, that I hope will remain in the future, still it is something we have to take into consideration. And I think the third thing is that with smaller plants, we are more flexible to respond to demand. So as I said, already in 2009, the Hungarian parliament had a political decision that we should establish a second nuclear power plant because it was a demand forecast that electricity demand will increase. Plus, at one point in time, we have to retire our existing nuclear power plant in Paks. And still 17 years later, we are still having debate, and the new government that John just mentioned is planning to actually renegotiate the Paks agreement with the Russians. So it is actually still under question whether it will be ever established. And with smaller plants, we can much more flexibly react to an electricity demand increase. It is actually no need to project electricity demand for 20, 30 years forward in order to make an investment decision now. We can basically see that, okay, if in the upcoming 3 or 5 years there will be an increasing need in electricity, we can respond to it by flexibly establishing new SMRs. However, of course, this is a new technology, so it is still kind of questionable whether it can live up to this promise that we see now. So I think one critical thing is that we should start pilot projects either in Hungary or in other countries to see whether it is really living up to the promise in terms of cost, in terms of timeline, in terms of security, in terms of public acceptance, because it is very important that, of course, everyone would like to have cheap electricity, but no one would like to have a nuclear power plant in its neighborhood. So it is also a question we have to take into consideration. And also the regulatory framework has to be established in a rather proactive way. That what is the regulatory environment that will establish the fast execution and the fast construction of a nuclear of an SMR, so that the regulatory barriers are not slowing down this process. So having said that, I think I'm already out of time. So thank you again for having me, and I wish you a very great conference. And it was really an honor to be in this panel.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much, Zombor. And I think I can speak for everyone in the room that we very much hope that the change of administration in Budapest will allow Hungary to re-engage with the international community, not just politically and economically, but also on technology issues, and take up a leading role in pushing forward on the impact of nuclear energy, especially SMRs, and allow Hungary to once again be an active player in this debate and not isolated as it has been for the last few years. I think we're right on time, and we have the opportunity now, I think, to listen to a special message from William Magwood, the Director General of the OECD's Nuclear Energy Agency. We've been very fortunate. Laetitia's managed to get him to record a statement for us. So without any further ado, if I can ask the technicians to roll the tape, as they say, and hopefully we can listen to Director General Magwood.
Good morning. I'm Bill Magwood. I'm Director General of the Nuclear Energy Agency. It's a pleasure to speak to the 3Cs Initiative meeting today. The topic you're here to discuss is SMRs, of course, and how they relate to the future of your energy policies. I think the most important place to start is to recognize that SMRs really are a different opportunity for nuclear energy, different from what we've seen in the past, because they do present the opportunity to make nuclear available to a much, much broader range of players than in the past. If you go back in the past, you look at who built large nuclear power plants, it was mostly countries with large economies and countries with large populations that could deal with the burden of building a large facility and also to distribute the energy. Now, with SMRs, the prospect exists for countries with smaller grids, with smaller economies, to become involved in the nuclear sector. And I think in this region, that will be very important. There are countries in the region that really just don't need to build a large 1,700 megawatt nuclear power plant, but perhaps one or two or three 300 megawatt plants built over a period of time might fit their needs better. And I think you're going to find that there are many situations like that around the world where countries that don't need a large plant or really can't afford a large plant can turn to SMRs as a pathway. This, I think, is going to open nuclear up to more countries in a more flexible way than we've ever seen before. Now, there is some danger to this, and that is that the costs of these smaller units, while on an absolute basis may be smaller than a large light water reactor, can be expensive on a per kilowatt basis, at least from what we've seen so far. That might change over time. What I think is necessary to try to get those costs down is for countries to start to cooperate as much as possible. Once you know what technology you're focusing on, work with the other countries that are working on the same technology and find ways to collaborate. I think very firmly, I believe this, that if countries are able to coordinate how they license these technologies so that there's a common approach to nuclear safety, that will enable you to have a common approach to not just safety, but operations and training and parts acquisition and many other things that will save a lot of resources in the future. So I think it's something to think about. So once you make your technology selection, look at your neighbors and see what they're doing and see if there's an opportunity for collaboration. I also believe that we are going to have to make a really significant effort to energize young people to come into the nuclear sector. In most of the countries that we work with, there simply aren't enough young people going into science and technology careers from which we can select those who will go into the nuclear sector. It's going to make it very, very difficult to meet all the staffing requirements to build new nuclear facilities and operate them over time. And so I think there's an opportunity there as well for the countries in this region to collaborate, to build some excitement for young people so that there is a path for them to become involved in nuclear relevant science and technology careers, because we need them. We need more people. And I believe that in collaborating together, you can create more excitement and more of a vision of the future than you would if you worked separately. So those are some of the thoughts that I would start with. but also recognize that we still have a long way to go in many aspects of building these SMRs. Supply chain is still uncertain. It's still very thin compared to what we had back in the 70s and 80s. And it's going to be very challenging to make sure that we're able to meet all of the ambitions of various countries around the world. But I believe that if we work together, we can send the right market signals and get the right information to the vendor community so they can make the investments to be prepared for the onslaught of orders that may be coming in the future. Perhaps the final thing is that we do need to think about how we're going to communicate with the public about all of this. SMRs, with whatever their advantages, are going to be a new way of generating electricity. They will be potentially closer to population centers than we've had in the past. They will fit in roles that perhaps are different from what we have seen in previous decades. And I think we have to start a conversation with the public as soon as possible to prepare for that. And if we can do this collectively, I think we benefit. While I'm sure that in each of your countries, experts are listened to and the public hears their voice and with credibility. But if you have experts in multiple countries saying the same thing, I think that makes the effect much more powerful. So collaboration, 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 I think that is the path here. If everyone goes alone and goes their own separate direction, it will be much more expensive. The projects will be much more risky from a success standpoint, and everything will be much less certain for the future. But if we work together, I think the prospects for success are much higher. So at the NEA, we're thrilled to work with all of you to support that and to make sure that we have the opportunity to see this bright future that is laid before us. So with that, have a great meeting, and I look forward to hearing the results.
Well, I think we can, in absentia, we can thank Bill for that very good coda to our panel. And thank you, Laetitia, again for arranging that opportunity for the audience to hear such an august person. Thank you very much. I think I'm very conscious that Laetitia runs these conferences with military precision. I've been given strict instructions to end the meeting promptly. So there won't be an unfortunate opportunity to talk to the panel here, but maybe during the break or during the lunch break, there'll be an opportunity for you to exchange some words with John and the Colonel. So thank you again to both of yourselves for coming, and Laetitia for organising. And I think that was a very stimulating opening to this very important side conference. And I look forward to the next panel, which will be starting imminently. Thank you again, Laetitia, and thank you all.